Hi, this is Seth Fleishman with World History by a Jew, and I'm back again today to cover Hammurabi, and not Hammurabi as in the literature, which we usually see on Digital Hammurabi, but we're going to be talking about the king himself, Hammurabi himself today. So what I like about Hammurabi is he's probably the first king in ancient history we really can do a biography of. And so for that reason, we're going to do a little bit of a story of Hammurabi's rule. And because I'm also a big fan of European history, I'm going to talk about Hammurabi in the 1800s BCE, like I would be talking about Europe in the 1800s CE of the Common Era. So let's talk about Hammurabi for a minute. So Hammurabi lived from about 1810 BCE to 1750 BCE. So that's and he reigned for about 42 years, from 1792 BCE to 1750 BCE. And so this is a very long rule. And any time in history when you have someone who rules for a long time, that tends to lead to stability. And when you have a good king who rules for a long time, that leads to a very healthy nation. So that's what we have with Hammurabi. So Hammurabi, when he became king at about 18 years of age, his father was already the king of Babylon, so he rightfully inherited the throne of his father. His father was Sin-Muballit, and he was kind of Babylon at the time was just an average-sized city. It wasn't anything special, and so he was a relatively minor king in the grand scheme of things. But so Hammurabi becomes a king at 18 years old, and while he's known for all his conquering and spreading out the Babylonian ways all over Mesopotamia, actually his first 25 years was just spent dealing with internal issues. He understood he needed to strengthen his base before he expanded, so he improved a lot on the city, a lot of great building projects in Babylon over his first 25 years, and he expanded the army, he trained the army, he made the army into a fighting machine ready to spread the Babylonian ways throughout all of Mesopotamia. So now let's talk about the countries when Hammurabi took command. So for that, I'm going to use my map here. I'm going to call my daughter Shira to be my map holding assistant. Here's where we're going to make the situation of Hammurabi like what we're used to with Europe in the 1800s. So if you see, here's Babylonia, and at this point Babylon is really just this top half of the map. The bottom half here is Larsa. And then we have Eshnunna, which is right here. And then Assyria, and I really want to call it Assyria, and then I'll cover that in just a minute. We have Mari. Mari is a major player in this discussion. I'll get to that in a minute. And then Yamkhad is the other one I wanted to mention. Of course, you have the Hittites and the Hurrians and all that. They're not so much part of our story right now. So the big superpower at this time is Elam, which is where modern Iran is. And so let's talk about each of these countries. So first of all, I'll jump with Assyria. Assyria, at the time, we actually call it the Kingdom of Northern Mesopotamia. It was historically termed by Assyriologists as the old Assyrian Empire, but that nowadays it's just called the Kingdom of Upper Mesopotamia. It was a bunch of tiny little cities, and not unlike Greece. So if you look at the Greek Empire, you had Athens and Sparta and all these different little city-states that would occasionally combine and work together or occasionally conquer each other. This was kind of northern Mesopotamia at the time. Right before the rule of Hammurabi, there was a ruler by the name of Shamshi-Adad, and he had united this area into one kingdom. But really, once Hammurabi comes around, you're seeing the after effects of his empire breaking up after he had passed away. Now, let's talk about Mari. So Mari was this major trade route. So you see that's central to our discussion here because it's the center of the map. So Mari was this major trade route traveling here between Iran, what's now Iran, all the way here to Mesopotamia. And they were a major land thoroughfare. And Mari, almost everything I'm telling you today actually comes from Mari. So anyone who follows European history knows that Venice has these great archives through the Middle Ages and into early modern Europe, and it's their archives that we use for figuring out what was going on in foreign relations. And Mari is kind of the same thing for Hammurabi's day. So Mari had a wonderful diplomatic service that were constantly sending tablets of information back to headquarters, so to speak. And it's those tablets that were found in the Mari archives that has allowed us to decipher most of the story that we're talking about. Mari was ruled by Zimri-lim, who actually had lost the throne during the rise of the old Assyrian Empire, the kingdom of Mesopotamia, but he had actually regained the throne. So Zimri-lim and his interaction with Hammurabi is a very entertaining part of our story. Next we have 🀭, and 🀭 here was actually on the Mediterranean coast, and 🀭 is really just kind of like the support team for Mari. So the queen of Mari was actually from 🀭. Her father was the king. So Zimri-Lim's father-in-law was the king of 🀭, which made them natural allies. All right, now let's look at Larsa. Larsa here is the southern part of what's labeled Babylonia on this map, and Larsa is what we think of as ancient Sumer. So Larsa is Ur and Uruk and Eridu, and all these original cities of Sumer form what's Larsa. And Larsa was ruled by Rim-Sin, who had been on the throne for a long time. He was very elderly at this point of our story with Hammurabi, and probably ruled until he was around 80 or so. So he was definitely the elder statesman of the group. Now let's look at Elam. Now Elam, as I said, was our superpower. This is ancient Iran. Elam was kind of this great king that had everything it needed. It had not only the lapis for jewelry, it had wood for building, it had stone, it had tin. So it had copper, it had all the natural resources it needed on its own to be a superpower. And then we have 𝑒shnu. Now 𝑒shnu is kind of this trading center between Mesopotamia, what's now Iraq, and then what's now Iran. So 𝑒shnu was kind of this area in the middle. So we're going to start off here with Hammurabi entering the international scene dealing with 𝑒shnu. So in 1767 BCE, Elam invades 𝑒shnu. And Elam, being the superpower, kind of strong arms Mari and Babylon. Notice that completely surrounds 𝑒shnu. So Elam kind of strong arms Mari and Babylon into helping them invade 𝑒shnu. 𝑒shnu doesn't stand a chance. So 1767, 𝑒shnu is dominated now by Elam. Now, of course, Babylon and Mari, so this is Hammurabi, and Zimri-Lim think, oh, well, if we just help Elam with 𝑒shnu, then Elam will leave us alone. Of course, it doesn't work like that. So now Elam starts thinking, well, I want to get Babylon next, or I want to get Larsa next. So Elam starts sending diplomats both to Babylon and to Larsa saying, hey, Babylon, if you help me defeat Larsa, we can split the proceeds. At the same time, Elam's sending diplomats here to Larsa saying, hey, if you help me with getting rid of Babylon, you, Larsa, and I can share Babylon. So Elam's playing them off against each other, but Hammurabi's spies find out. And this is where it gets interesting. So Hammurabi now talks to Rim-Sin, the leader of Larsa, saying, let's actually team up and defeat Elam. But Rim-Sin gives this story about how he's going to help and all this, but he actually does nothing to materially help them. But nonetheless, that doesn't stop Hammurabi. Hammurabi now using the army of Mari and his army, along with fermenting uprisings within 𝑒shnu. These two countries team up with these uprisings in 𝑒shnu and push Elam back across out of Mesopotamia and back into their traditional territory across the mountains. So this actually gets Elam out of Mesopotamia, and you've got now this relationship between Babylon and Mari. And now the one thing that Hammurabi does wrong is, even though Zimri-Lim, the king of Mari, tells him to make sure that he picks the right person to rule 𝑒shnu, Hammurabi does not take the advice, and he lets a commoner with a great name by the name of 𝀭So 𝀭now is going to be the ruler of 𝑒shnu, but 𝀭does not remember what Hammurabi did for him, and this will lead to trouble down the road. So And just to give you a quick timeline, 1767, you've got the Elam taking over Eshnunna. 2 years later, 1765, is when you have this controversy between Elam and Babylon and Larsa. And then it's 1764 that Hammurabi is then able to, Hammurabi with Maury's help was able to push Elam back out of Eshnunna. And so now let's look at 1763, because Hammurabi is ready to get revenge on Larsa. What does he want revenge on? Well, remember that elderly Rim-Sin in Larsa had said he was going to help Hammurabi defeat Elam, but he did not. And now Hammurabi is ready to get his revenge on Rim-Sin. So using the army of Maury and his own army, at this point Hammurabi invades Larsa. And he would defeat Larsa. And so with these two kingdoms combined, Larsa's gone. But what's important here is, this is when what you see Babylonia on the map became Babylonia. So when Larsa is defeated, Larsa is then merged with the kingdom of Babylon. And this right here is the kingdom of Babylon from now on. So the rest of history, this is the battle that leads to Babylon being Babylon. Okay, so the next year is when it's time for Hammurabi to deal with Eshnunna. Why? Well, because now that Babylon's become so powerful, we've had several things going on here. One is Maury and Eshnunna are a little bit worried. Babylon's now twice as powerful as it was a couple years earlier. And not only that, Babylon keeps holding on to Maury's army. It took forever for Hammurabi, like 2 years Hammurabi held Maury's army before he let them go home. And so this caused a lot of tension between Hammurabi as the king of Babylon and Zimri-Lim as the king of Maury. Eshnunna, remember, they were the ones who had the commoner, Silly Sin, take control. And the rulers of Eshnunna were not at all friendly to Babylon. So at this point, Hammurabi is trying to decide how to handle the situation, and then there was a mistake between Maury and Eshnunna that sets off this I guess, if this area is a powder keg, this is the match for the powder keg. To borrow a World War I comparison, Maury and Eshnunna are, again, having, similar to how we started the story with Elam, Maury and Eshnunna are now having their diplomats talking about how to deal with Hammurabi, and maybe the two of them should team up to defeat Hammurabi and invade from both sides. And Hammurabi's spies again come through for him, and he finds out. Now, Eshnunna does not have strong leadership. Eshnunna is now much smaller than Hammurabi. So Hammurabi in 1762 invades Eshnunna, and when he invades Eshnunna, they just stand no chance. Weak leadership, they're worn down from years of fighting between all these guys here, completely surrounded, and Eshnunna is gone in no time. Now we have the next step for Hammurabi, because Hammurabi has also been dealing with the Assyrians here, what we now call the Assyrians. So these little countries I compared to ancient Greece that are always fighting these little city-states, they keep running to Hammurabi saying, hey, I want to be I want you to back me, Hammurabi, so I can defeat my next-door neighbor. And then the next-door neighbor comes and say, hey, you know, Hammurabi, back me, and I'll defeat my next-door neighbor. And finally, he just decides he's sick of all these politics, and he's going to go in and take over the whole area. So Hammurabi's army does not go home. In 1762, they march from Eshnunna straight into what you see as Assyria on the map, and he takes over all these city-states easily, and they become part of the Babylonian Empire. Now, he's not finished, because things have soured with Maury. First of all, we have this thing about him holding the army of Maury for 2 years longer than agreed. We have the situation where Maury is going to team with Eshnunna to tamp down the power of Babylon. And then we have a final dispute that sets Hammurabi over the edge the next year. So, and by the way, Megan had also mentioned this in one of the previous videos on Digital Hammurabi, but there was a dispute at the city of Hit. If you look here on the right at the border of Maury and Babylon, there's a little city called Hit. And Hit was a major religious center for these two countries. Their religion had trial by ordeal. And this particular ordeal was that you had this very sharp bend in this river with a very strong current, and if you were able to swim through and survive this sharp bend, then you were innocent of whatever you're accused of. If you didn't survive, then, well, you were gone and you were assumed to be guilty. So this bend in the river right at the city of Hitt had become a major religious center, but there's a little bit more to the story. It was also of the Babylonian Empire. This was quite possibly the easiest source of bitumen, which was vital to shipbuilding. This was an ancient petroleum product used for sealing ships, and this city happened to be a major source of it. Now, for Hammurabi, the main thing was bitumen, and for Maury, the main thing was the religion. And it shows you a little bit different philosophy between the two different countries, right? That Maury was more of a land-based country. They're more focused on the religion aspect of it. Babylon, where ships were vital to the survival of the kingdom. The shipbuilding ingredient was more important than the religious ingredient. Either way, the two armies are in a dispute over whose city this is. And at this point, Hammurabi in 1761 BCE decides to settle it once and for all, and he attacks Maury. Now, he does it as a two-pronged attack. We know he comes in from both the north and the south. Our problem here is because we're relying on Maury's archives to know exactly what happened, you kind of have like this very sudden ending of the story where in Maury they know they're being attacked by two sides. There's a lot of misinformation. They don't know where things are going, but they figured out they're being attacked by two fronts, and then all of a sudden the records just stop. They're done. And so this we know from later sources, this is the end of Maury. Maury actually ceases to exist for the rest of time. This is the very end of Maury. Maury is now part of the Babylonian Empire. It will never be its own country again. It will be its own state, province within other countries, but Maury ceases to exist as an independent entity. And also, unfortunately, this is the end of these wonderful diplomatic records that we have. There's still some decent archives, like in Qatar, but this makes the story a little bit harder to know after this. But clearly, this is when we know the Babylonian Empire of Hammurabi is now established. He's now taken over this entire region, and this is where the expansion, our story of our expansion is kind of going to stop, because the next 10 years, relatively speaking, are rather peaceful for Hammurabi. He'll rule out his next 10 years only dealing with some uprisings here and there. But now, thanks to Hammurabi, Babylon would be a central city in the world for the next 1,500 years. Their god, Marduk, which I didn't really speak about in this, that's for another lecture, but their god would become the most powerful god in the Mesopotamian religion also for the next 1,000 or so years. And I didn't even get to what Hammurabi's most known for, and that's being the lawgiver. He's one of the few people in history known as being a lawgiver, and that's also for another lecture. Thank you very much.